sort of talk through what we're doing. So here's let me share my screen. I think I just did. Is it sharing? Yes, you guys should see it. Awesome. So you should see each other's faces. Now you should see this. So I created a silly manifesto thing, and it's in the DivOps.dev. I guess you guys probably all saw this, but I created a DivOps.dev site. This is just like the absolute most basic Gatsby site ever that uses the Gatsby theme starter, and because I was like, ugh, and so I just did all this. So this is sort of a landing page for this whole thing. I'm definitely open for pull requests into this. I created there's a DivOps organization, DivOps devs, because somebody has DivOps and isn't using it, of course, like always. So the site's here. I can add you guys all into this if you want. I even thought, like, Alex and Kyle and I kind of talked at one point about even just throwing more repos in here about different open sourcey DevOps tooling and techniques and whatnot. So we could do that at some point. I thought that was kind of a cool idea. So yeah, and basically this will look very familiar to Ben. This is our front end guild meeting agenda template that I just copied and pasted into here. Thought it was a good starting point. Let me move you guys' faces down to a different screen so I can actually see your faces. Okay. All right. And that is a sneak peek about that. So yes, DevOps Dev, there's the organization. I wanted to talk, I kind of envisioned this as sort of like a meetup, virtual meetup, and normally those are once a month. So I was thinking that might be a good cadence, if you guys agree. I'm seeing a lot of head nods. So, okay, that's cool. So maybe we'll just go first Wednesday at 11 every month for a while, see how that works out. Yeah, I was kind of trying to think through, and we can do this asynchronously, but if you have any ideas for the group, we could just write down some goals about and I guess some of this is what I talked about a few minutes ago, which is provide a sounding board for people like us, for these sort of unicorn weird developers that don't do front end but do front end, that kind of stuff. We're going to sort of talk about that. Yeah, I'm curious to hear what all types of things you want to see from the group, and maybe some ideas for topics. And then in a minute, Kyle and I will, or I'll mostly do it, and Kyle might chime in for color commentary on just a tiny slide deck I put together about our monorepo that we have at Eventbrite. And I was thinking, going forward, what I'd like to do, I want to go more in depth into some of our stuff, but I'll probably do that at another meet. But because I figured today we'd talk about a bunch of other stuff and not have a ton of time left. So I was thinking, going forward, what I'd like, and if you guys think this is a good idea, I'd like to kind of go for the first few of these, maybe company by company, and just do a high level overview of your DevOps stack at your company. And so, for us, whenever we go, and again, I'll talk a little bit about our stuff today. I just don't have a ton of time, or I don't think I'll have a ton of time. For us, I would talk about our CI and our monorepo and some of the tooling and blah, blah, blah. Just so that if I say something that strikes a chord with someone, we're about to switch to Circle, which is actually happening. We finally got the green light through legal. So Ben, you'd love that. It's a whole heck of a thing. We have this just horrible, awful Jenkins setup with machines that have hard-coded keys on them, and there's 50. Hey, Ross. Dude, it's so nice to see you too. Another Ross, which is hilarious. 2 Rosses in one place. Ross used to work with us at Eventbrite as well. If you want to just say hey real quick, Ross, all we did to say hey was just hey, I'm Ross, and I live here, and I work there.
Oh, sure. Apologies for being late.
No, don't worry
a
about
little
it.
crazy this morning because we've got smoke-covered Bay Area here, and I had to find some air filters. So yeah, calling in from San Francisco. not quite in the scene of the apocalypse, but nearby. And used to work at EB doing front end product development. Actually accepting a job offer today where I'll be working in a more full stack role, but been mostly a front end focused engineer, JavaScript based engineer for a handful of years now.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I threw the screen back up because I'm recording my screen with Camtasia. That's why it's so people can actually see you now. Awesome. So I was basically just giving people the rundown on what I think I want to see out of the group, and I'll get some opinions on that in a minute. And then I have this agenda up. Yeah, so that's kind of what I was thinking. So we could have, it's like try to go volunteer basis, or I can volunteer someone to go next. But so maybe like the next time we'll have Stitch Fix be the host or whoever wants to do it, and just kind of talk about your stack. And then once we sort of go through that for maybe a few meetups or so, we can maybe start doing more traditional like talks on other DivOpsy things. But yeah, that's kind of where my head's at. I'm just feel like I'm flying by the seat of my pants. I've never done anything like this before. I've never started my own meetup, so hopefully I'm doing okay. And yeah, so I guess if there's any sort of thoughts on that, speak up now. If there's any thoughts on what I've said so far, I'd love to hear from the group on anything else, any other ideas you guys have.
No, that sounds awesome. This is great.
Yeah, I like the plan.
We got all this together.
Awesome.
And Stitch, we should be able to do the next one.
Okay. I wasn't volunteering you for that. I was just giving you as an example.
You kind of were, but that's okay.
I wasn't.
Yeah. So we could share ours.
Perfect.
And then, whatever you bring up, then we can chime in and comment. Because you said you're using Circle or going to be using Circle. We use Circle
oh, nice.
Here at Stitch Fix and such. So
it makes me feel
at
so
a
much.
very
Just
large,
hearing that,
scale.
Hearing that makes me feel so much better. I feel warm and fuzzy on the inside now.
Yeah. Yeah. So we use it for everything, not just JavaScript, but for Ruby and Rails and running tests in Rails and deploying packages. And
I would like to hear, you guys said you're moving from Jenkins to Circle. Just would like to hear maybe when you go over that, the reasoning why you made that move and decision.
Yeah, for sure. Basically, like I was starting to say, our Jenkins setup here is very locked down just because it's so old. I mean, it's been around for years, and Ben knows. I mean, he was here for 4 or 5 years, and there's just a lot that the boxes are all just EC2 nodes flying around with all kinds of stuff on them and specific setups, and I don't even think I think it was pretty hard. They were all manually spun up. I don't think there was any sort of automation around getting them spun up or AMIs. Is that what AMIs to spin them up that I know of. So yeah, there's literally probably 50 to 100 nodes that get spun up, and they die a lot, and it gets slow, and the permissions are tied, stuck.
Same problem here.
Yeah,
it's worth noting that they're just running all the time. So it's not you're paying for it whether you're using or not.
Yeah,
using it or not.
Yeah, bad stuff.
Well,
It's
not
expensive
for that.
to keep that as a managed solution.
Well, you're not using a managed solution, right? Aren't you? It's not in the cloud. It's not Jenkins cloud. It's local. So
right. Yeah, it's all.
You're paying Amazon, but you're not.
Yeah, and really everything at Eventbrite's infrastructure is self-ran, or it has traditionally been. We ran our own MySQL servers with EC2. We didn't use RDS or anything like that. No managed offerings. We're kind of moving that way now. We had another Jenkins instance that we spun up that was, sorry, Matt's jumping in. We had another Jenkins spun up in a Kubernetes environment called Archipelago that we did that was pretty cool. Hey, Matt, just kind of chatting. I'll just pause for a second. I've been making people just say, hi, I'm so-and-so and I work at so-and-so. If you want to say, hey, Matt, if you're there.
Sure, Matt Trevi. I am coming from Risk Management Solutions.
Very nice. Thank you, sir. All right, so we were talking about why we switched from Jenkins to Circle at Eventbrite, or why we're in that process. It's definitely going to be a long process. Yeah. So yeah, it's super expensive, obviously, to host all those nodes because they're all like double XL, whatever crazy things. It's not good. So we're trying to transition to Circle, and thankfully Alex here used Circle at his last gig, and so he's more familiar with it even than I am, and so he's kind of taking some of the work that Kyle and I have did in the Jenkins. We did at least get to the point where we're using Jenkins file with pipelines and a multi-branch pipeline that spins up using Git polling for your branch. So it's fine, it's okay, it works. It's just terrible. And so yeah, now we're going to be using the other stuff, and it was like so amazing to me because we have this one step of our Jenkins job that does some validating of the megarepo thing, and it's one that can kind of run pretty much in isolation, and he got it working in Circle, and it's like I was testing something with it, and I was amazed that like I could commit code, push it to Circle, get a status check in GitHub in like a minute, like less than a minute, and it was faster for me to test the changes to the Docker image for that by pushing it to Circle than it was like building it on my own machine. So that was like, oh my gosh, now I'm just in love with this thing. We looked at GitHub Actions a little bit too, but the organization is moving towards Circle as well, not just front end. So like the Python teams and the iOS teams were all wanting Circle also. So we still might do some GitHub Actions for a handful of things, maybe, because there's some stuff for like linting in GitHub Actions that's kind of cool. It like automatically annotates your PR, which is sort of kind of nice. But long story short, yes, that is why we're migrating away from Jenkins to Circle. It's going to be a long road, especially for the back-end teams, because there's going to be a lot of security and key management and things. For us, it should be a little easier. Most of our stuff, well, now I feel like I'm just hijacking and talking what I said.
Hey, Jonathan, if I can chime in here and maybe add a little bit more color to anybody who's trying to convince their organization to shift to Circle. A big thing for us, obviously, with the times that we're in, is Eventbrite is in a survival mode for a bit, just because we're not able to go and have events. A big thing for us right now is we recognize while we're maintaining both Jenkins and Circle that there is an initial, we're initially spending more, but our goal transitioning to Circle is that we'll be able to eventually spin down those EC2 Jenkins boxes and only be paying for what we're using. Hopefully, be saving money in the long run.
Yep, exactly. So it should be a whole heck of a lot better. So yeah, that's sort of the Jenkins Circle spiel. My daughter's walking in now. Hello. Okay, so that is that. So that kind of stuff is exactly the kind of conversations that I was hoping to have in this group. And I could talk about Circle or Jenkins until I'm blue in the face. Maybe we can have a whole day just dedicated to that, and that part of our infrastructure. So, let's see. Unless there's any other kind of thoughts on, and I kind of want to fill this in later myself, and maybe give you guys a chance to, if you have any other ideas on goals that you'd like to see out of the group, types of things or topics. Like, so obviously it sounds like Jenkins to Circle is maybe a good topic. Whatever, Webpack performance. I'm just like making stuff up now, but if there's any other ideas you have, I see several people are in the document. Just feel free to drop thoughts in here. Next, I will go ahead and I created a tiny little document or a spreadsheet. God, what do you call these things? Slide deck. There you go. To sort of talk through one piece of the Eventbrite DivOps sort of structure. and that is our megarepo. Let me move your faces back down. Sweet. All right. I assume everybody can see the megarepo slide. Cool. Oh, thank you, Kyle, for that, placing that in there. So, tradition. Oh, first of all, well, I've already done all this. I put all this in here, and then I realized that I already did this. So this is us. We are Eventbrite's front-end infra team. Me, Kyle, and Alex. So I started in June of 2.5 years ago, which is crazy. It's been that long already. Kyle started just a little bit before I did. I think in November prior, and then Alex started. What month did you start, Alex? I don't even remember now.
I think I started in March.
Oh, you're not a senior. Yeah, you. Oh, surprise!
Not a
Alex,
senior engineer yet.
I just realized he's not senior engineer. He's Eng 2, Eng 1, Eng 2.
I was at my last job, so
Yes.
that's fine.
So what we had when I first got here is, and Ben and Ross are very familiar with all this. We had been traditionally for many years a marionette stack inside of Django, and so all of our code is like nested deeply inside Django Media Django, and there's like require.js and Backbone and Marionette, jQuery. I actually get feels when I go in there and have to look at that stuff every now and then, just like, man, I remember this stuff. This is awesome. This was like the pinnacle of my career, working with all this stuff. So I was still very much alive. It's more dead now than it was then, but it's still going strong in some parts of our code base. There was this thing called core.js, though, which is where we had started migrating over to React. And it was a whole hell of a lot better. There's basically like a Django view per app, and then core.js had like a source directory full of all these apps, and using Webpack and all the latest stuff that we could do. So yeah, it was pretty good for a while. Some of the reasons it wasn't good, though, was really not necessarily the fault of the front end team. The way Eventbrite was built traditionally is it's a huge monolith, which I'm sure is a word that brings tingles down a lot of people's spines. And it takes a really, really long time to deploy. It wasn't broken up at all. And so to try to run the app on your machine was a nightmare.
Is core.js just isn't that the polyfill project with all the...
It also is that. You're right. But this is not that core.js. This was our Eventbrite core.js. Sorry.
Okay.
That's hilarious that you pointed that out. Yes, that's not the npm I core.js. That is the core.js. Actually, really is more of the Docker sort of image that we used to run our front end code in this hand spun Docker runner that we have called Bay. It was built before Docker Compose was really popular, and so we hand rolled our own like Docker image runner on local machines. But it was insane. Like, you had to go in and tweak your Docker settings to allow it to even run, because it took so much memory, because you basically had to run the entire site on your machine. They had broken most of it down into small Docker images, like for different parts of the site. And right when I had started, they'd gone through a process of creating different like profiles, more or less, where you could run, just certain parts of the site. And it wasn't like the worst thing, but it was hard because part of the way that the code was mounted inside of Docker, like, you couldn't actually use like IntelliSense or anything in VS Code, because the mount path for Docker was like /srv/node modules. So, and it would try to symlink from that path, which obviously didn't exist on my machine, srv/node modules. So you couldn't even use like your local node modules. If you wanted to do anything with nodes, you had to actually use Bay exec, which was basically just a Docker exec to shell into the container to run like lint or Babel or anything. It was all containerized and virtualized, which, like, in theory is great, right? Because it should run the same on everybody's machine, and there's that whole like Docker promise of that. But man, it caused just about as many problems as it solved, and it was pretty slow a lot of the times, or it would break, and you'd have to bay hup all the time, which meant just basically stop and restart your container for various reasons. It became the have you tried turning it on and off again thing was like have you bay hupped basically. So yeah, it was really bad. Not long story short, it was really bad. We didn't like it, and right around the time we started, where the project that Ben and Kyle were working on was the idea of making everything in that CoreJS folder into its own like Yarn workspace. It was called the Independent Package JSON project, IPJ for short. And that project was a nice precursor to the monorepo setup, because it helped isolate every app from each other at least, except for this one damn folder called common that they all tied back into, that we had to break up into lots of other places.
Hey, Jonathan.
Yes.
So to back up, because you have all the context, but being someone who's not been in it, so you had everything in one repo, right?
Yes.
And they all had a single package JSON.
Yes.
And then there was multiple Webpack entry points that simulated the apps, right? Is that how you got your multi-app setup?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. Okay. So Ben saying that because he knows too, because he built most of it. So yeah, thank you for the added color commentary, because there's certain. Yeah. I'm glad you said some of that, because like it's just, there's a lot.
So those entries basically map to each folder that were inside that were in a relative path based off of that package JSON. And so our project was basically to make each one of those folders into its own package inside of a workspace. And the goal there was really just to, like, one of the biggest goals was actually to try and take this like relative nested import path sort of spaghetti chaos and make it something where we can actually like map the dependencies across the board. Interestingly enough, it's exactly what we're doing right now with our component design system, which I have some really cool stuff I want to show off for that. But the way that, so essentially each one of those Webpack entry points we made into its own package, and then leveraged Yarn workspaces to actually give them their independence. Mm-hmm. The interesting part here we ended up building out a command line tool called Bright CLI. Everything at Eventbrite's Bright. And so that tool was then installed into each one of these packages so that they could actually be independently built, independently tested. And the goal really was independence. It was called Independent Package JSON, and we wanted to give independent dependencies as well.
Yeah.
We quickly realized with this process, though, that at the time I think we had about 40 apps. When we give them independence, they all start installing different versions of the same package.
Yeah.
And so our Yarn installs started to conflate, and we ended up with these just massive Yarn installs that were taking up loads of time in our Docker images inside of CI as well as local machines. And so we weren't able to continue down that path for very long. So eventually we actually forced everyone to stay on the same version of everything until we found out that there's actually a monorepo package that does that, or monorepo manager that does that, which is Bolt, created by Jamie Builds. We only found that out because Jamie actually worked with us at the time, and he said, "Hey, why don't you just use Bolt?" And so the goal there, once we had Bolt, we shifted mindsets on how we were building these toolings, and that's how we landed on the idea of a megarepo.
Yeah, exactly.
All of our tooling moved from one script that's ran across each package instead to being scripts, a set of scripts that are aware that they live inside of a monorepo and take that into account. So every single script we have at the beginning of it, it basically does a git change set or git changes. So that it's only running things like lint and builds against the set of changes. We do that using the dependency graph built through Atlassian's tool called Changesets and the Changesets CLI. And what's really cool about that is that basically every pull request is forced to have one of these change sets, which
This is what the change
Essentially,
look like. I don't know if
yeah,
you're looking at the slides, Kyle, but what's hilarious is you're literally talking through the slides that I wrote, and you've never seen these slides. So,
yeah, I've never seen these slides, but that's fine.
it's awesome because you're literally
we're
going in order of everything that I wrote, which is awesome. Keep
Wait,
going.
I have a question.
Don't stop. Yes.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So before everything was in one repo, right, and one package JSON, what was the problem with that, and what does this new thing solve? I guess because like at Stitch Fix, every app is its own repo, and we have them separated so they have their independence. So I'm wondering why you didn't go that route and have separate apps, have separate repos as opposed to the mega repo.
No, that's a great call out. So the original the original repo we had, like Jonathan mentioned, was a monolith, and not only included all of our JavaScript code, but included all of our backend code. It included like random bits of just about everything. So one of the big goals was to get away from that. Like Ben mentions, one of the options is just to basically create a bunch of small repos. And then share the tooling like we did while we were building with the Yarn workspaces. And interestingly enough, at Eventbrite, we did both. We actually still have a bunch that are just small repos that share a set of tooling and builds and deploys, and they're all kind of just off on their own little island. The reason that we chose though for a monorepo was more for the consistency for the front end applications. For things like our component library, where if we make a drastic design decision that, those never happen, right? Like the day of an IPO or something like that. If we wanted to be able to scale that out to the entire company and to the entire .com site all at once, we need to be able to not only introduce that change into our front end packages, but then be able to then release them as quickly as possible all together. And that sort of coordination became easier when it's all in one repository. You can have one pull request that handles the package upgrades. You can have one that handle that same pull request can also handle all of the necessary breaking changes that's introduced or any other changes that are kind of happening. And so efforts that could have taken teams multiple weeks of coordination to be able to have happen across the entire site, we're actually able to have one or two engineers do inside of a single repo and inside of a single pull request. So that was the major goal for us, was to be able to give that autonomy to one person to decide that they want to upgrade the React version or make a change to get us off of Redux form or something like that, where someone with all of the context could actually make an impact larger than just their one project.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
How do you get your pure front end coworkers to kind of buy into that sort of scheme? Because it seems like it forces them to kind of learn new tools, and in my experience, people don't like learning new tools. If they, you know what I mean?
How did you convince me?
It's a great question. I mean, we really.
I was one of the developers that was convinced. That's why I was just.
Yeah. So specifically, the things that we got pushback on was more people wanting to be able to use different. The only thing that we're actually forcing everyone to use the same, which is basically our build tooling.
And versions of common things, like the one thing we got a lot of pushback was when we first did this, we were stuck on React 15, and there were teams really wanting to use 16, and I mean 16 was off and going, and so that was one sticking point, was the package versions, but that's just the core ones, like React DOM, React Redux, everybody has to share those dependencies. But if you want your own dependency, if you want to import React calendar list or something, you can do that in your app. It's just because you imported it in your app, everyone has to use the same version of that across the whole thing. That's all.
So does everyone at Eventbrite have to understand what a pure dependency is in order to do their job?
Nope.
All of our dependencies are actually initialized in just the dependency tree. And then the tooling that we use, specifically this Changeset one behind the scenes here, That's what actually manages the versions of anything that's interweaved between the different packages. And I think that's something that I kind of missed in the reasoning. One of the big advantages of the monorepo is that we're able to share packages more easily. So if one person builds up a new component and they make it as a separate package, because everyone's using the same version of everything, we're guaranteed that it's going to work across the board.
Yep.
And so really the way that we impressed people was we just knocked their socks off on how amazing the tooling was and how easy it was to basically go from a dev experience where you're only running your app to a PR experience where only your parts of CI are being tested and ran against, and then a deployment experience that went from 2 deployments a week to you could be deployed in 5 minutes, right? So that's, I think, the major area where we were able to like really outshine things was just that simplicity. I think was the biggest thing that was a win factor. We were actually able to convince people that didn't have to actually use it, but were strong opponents to it inside of other areas of the infrastructure, specifically our release team. Was concerned about us releasing at our own frequency, and basically any engineer can now release front-end code whenever they feel like is kind of a crazy concept, especially in a world where we're a public company and we have SOX compliance. But after like the first 3 bugs that came in from front-end code that we were able to like revert or resolve in 10 minutes, the release team was sold.
I have a question for you guys, actually.
Yeah.
So DivOps, right? We're all doing like front end architecture and behind the scenes stuff. How does your team in Eventbrite work with the enterprise-wide DevOps teams? Because there's obviously other DevOps going on behind the scenes that's not front end. And how do you work with those teams?
So we're in a pillar called enablement and quality, and so those teams are our siblings teams to us. When I first started, there wasn't a ton of overlap because we were all sort of in that Bay world. And as we started doing this, it became readily evident that we needed to fix that problem. I could not say that word I was trying to say. We needed to fix that problem, and so we ended up setting up a weekly meeting with our SREs. With like a few of them, not the whole team, but like a few SREs that can help us. We have embedded SRE, and then we have like the eng manager and the product manager from their team comes, and we just talk. And it's actually we joke that it's our favorite 15 minutes of the week because we get a shit ton done every 15 minutes. Every Thursday at 1:45, we talk to that team and we're like, hey guys, we need such and such key added to whatever. And they're like, all right, cool. And then, they tell us what they're doing. And so that idea came up after some margaritas in San Francisco one day. We were like, man, we got to talk to more people. And so we started spinning up all these like side meetings. And that was the big one that had a huge impact.
And that meeting also includes our dev tool, like our backend dev tools team, or they're just called dev tools. And like as I've described our team and as other and how I try to pitch our team to other areas of the company is that like we're the front end equivalent of both our SREs and our dev tools, right? Like our job is both on the build side of things and the tooling side of things, but also on the deployment side and the reliability and ensuring that it's running. And so it was only fitting for us to have a weekly stand-up with those two teams. And so it's been, like Jonathan said, it's been extremely fruitful. We've got, it allows us to make sure that our roadmaps are aligned. And like, as we mentioned at the beginning, our push right now for Circle came from the dev tools team, and we've kind of picked it up, and they gave us the keys to it so that we can start to drive that initiative as well. But we sort of do things a bit siloed from them still. At times we'll tend to share things. When Jamie was here, he was able to help us build out. He was looking at building out our ability to do webhooks into GitHub in a secure fashion. Once he was able to do that for our team, the dev tools team was able to leverage it. We built up a merge queue for our front end code because part of our CI process bumps the version, commits those changes, and then generates a README and so forth. And we pushed that up to the branch, and so we needed the ability to only like throttle our builds. And so when we did that, then we also were able to kind of push for more stuff along the way.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So I had a question about the Changesets, I guess. That's there. So you said there's only a single version. So if I want a lower version of something and somebody wants a higher version, like that's just like not possible.
Correct.
Right. So there's like, what kind of friction does that cause? And then like, how do you go up to the next major version without breaking stuff, or how do you test the whole, all the apps basically?
This right here kind of will give an example of that. So like our EB configs folder has all of our Webpack configs, which then in turn means it also has a dependency on like Webpack and all the plugin. So let's say I want to make a change to, and even take this for any example here. If this is like a component in your whatever, in your chain that lots of other things depend on, when I generate this Changesets and when I run this thing called release plan, it's like, okay, cool, I see that you're going to change the configs. Well, your dev server is a dependency of the configs project. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to leverage that release plan as a way to figure out like, and this happens a lot, especially with when we're bumping our low-level components or bumping EDS. I mean, we have our own internal design system, and so every time we have to do that, like everything depends on it. And for the React upgrade in particular, like what would happen is we created a branch, and it's like we would run the change, and it would trigger subsequent CI for everything that changed. And you could tell immediately because it would run all the Jest tests. It will run Cypress tests against everything. And so your one tiny change that you made, your one version bump, cascades down into determining what all is affected downstream. And so then to Kyle's point, it's like one developer can, with a pretty high level of confidence, determine whether or not that bump is going to jack someone else's code up. We've done a pretty good job, I think, with testing overall, and particularly now that we're getting into the Cypress world, where like it'll take recordings and screenshots of things that broke. So yeah, that's the problem that Changesets sort of solves for us with this get dependence graph piece that they have, and the release plan. It gives you like literally a list of every package and its like downstream dependencies, and then that release plan sort of is just a JSON form of exactly what you want to test, based on your change set, which is basically this like markdown looking weird thing. So this will often be, we even wrote some tooling the Changeset CLI. Let me just show that. So the Changeset CLI, when you come in here and you're like yarn changeset, it gives you a list of all of the packages in your app. And then you can go ahead and go through and pick like exactly which ones changed. So if I changed the button in the button bar, for example, and I just minored them or majored them, it doesn't really matter, just ping this. Now my change set will be created in this folder, and it'll tell me like which things I need to release once I run the release plan. Like everything that depends on the button will need a patch to match with this. So now I can test every downstream app that depends on the button component or whatever, which is probably everything. But you get the point. Like it just, everything sort of cascades.
As a point of clarity, like there's sort of some interesting nuance to the dependencies. While it is true that you're forced onto all the same versions, for external dependencies, those all come from npm or your registry, and they're forced to be the same like scoping number, and which ends up downloading one package. But the interesting part with the monorepo setup itself is that everything is symlinked, and so everything that we're building is not actually based off of any particular version. It's all based off of the latest code in the repo. We've definitely ran into some troubles with this at times where, somebody pushes a change to a library that breaks some code and they want to be like, oh, can we just like change the version for that one library to like roll back? And it's like, well, no. So like they actually have to, in those cases, revert the entire commit and then push up a new version, or either roll back the entire version of the application. And so that's kind of, that was something that we picked out originally, that we wanted to go with a very roll forward approach. Mm-hmm. And so if as bugs arise, we're either going to patch them and send up a new version, or we're going to roll back, patch them, send up a new version, or we're going to revert them entirely and push a new version with the reversion. So
the symlink thing that Kyle mentioned is part of the reason why we were excited about Bolt versus Lerna, for a couple different reasons. One is like the way Bolt does things is the way it manages dependencies as a... Oh, okay, thank you very much. All right, I will. I'm on a call right now. The way it symlinks dependencies is we have our top-level package JSON, and every single dependency that's used throughout every other folder in the packages directory is in here. So no matter what you add, if you add, a library in your package JSON for the artist page, when you say bolt workspace artist page add, it adds it here and up at the top. And what it does then, after it has done all of its regular yarn stuff, is it actually symlinks the node modules from every nested package all the way up to the top node modules directory. And then it symlinks cross internal projects to each other as well. So if you look at any of these @EBs, most of these are internal dependencies within the monorepo, and they're symlinked directly to the folder that the thing lives in. So EB core manage lives in infra core manage, or wherever it lives. I don't even know. I think it's actually an organizer. So yeah, it's right here. So basically there's a direct link from that folder's node modules directly to this project. And that's just what Bolt does out of the box for you. Part of why this was also really nice is, I don't know how many of you have worked with Lerna. When I tried to use Lerna before for Docker, I had to go in and do like Docker copy package JSON to /, and then I had to go like Docker copy packages /stars/package JSON, or you can't even do star. You had to do like individually. Whereas with this, like I can run yarn once, or Bolt, which is the sort of wrapper around yarn, and it installs everything at that top level, and then Bolt just symlinks it all back, and it's super nice and fast. So,
something else I wanna make a call out for anybody who's looking at this kind of transition is, at least with Bolt, it makes available a lot of the integrations for you to be able to script and check what packages have changed, and then from there you can set up your CI to only test those packages and dependents of those packages.
Exactly.
It's worth pointing out that there is a certain amount of investment that you have to make in order for this type of tooling to really work at scale. But once you have made that investment, it's really easy to change that, and you start to get returns on those investments in reliability, in confidence in your code, and being able to share code across different apps that would be a lot more complicated to share if they were in different repositories.
Yep. So to cut to Alex's point, exactly what's on here is there's a function in the Changesets called get change changeset file since ref. So you can literally like get a list of the files within each package that changed. So you could run ESLint just against your changed files or whatever, and then publish it all at once. All of our tooling, so like everything that builds the apps, is also right next to the code. So we've got that Bright CLI Kyle mentioned, as well as some utilities and the dev server, and everything's in there. All of our configs live in here in one place. So every Babel, every ESLint, everything is just boom right there. You don't have to go digging through stuff. It's just all in there. Our certificates for local dev, HTTPS, it's just all there. We've done some generators for like creating new packages and adding tests and adding Cypress. Storybook is pretty cool now. Like since everything's in one place, you can either run like Storybook for a specific app, or you could run Storybook for the entire repo and see every story that's in EBUI, which is really nice. If you want to, we could literally like, and we've been talking about it, we just haven't done it. We could literally generate a Storybook site and put it somewhere that has every story from all of the front end code that's been written, and put it like on S3 or something, like if we want to, because it's all in the same place. We don't have to write crazy tooling to go do that. You have a question, Mark? So I unmute.
Storybook is awesome.
Yes, it is awesome, and more teams are realizing that. And in one of the next meetups, we'll talk about this scenario testing stuff that we've been working on too. Like the 30-second thing of scenario testing is think like running Cypress against a dev server that knows how to talk to your backend, but can also mock calls to your backend if you want. So it can mock like your whole entire initial markup, as well as any API calls to your backend. So we have teams that can, the authentication team in particularly, for like our login page, he showed us the other day where you can choose like user is logging in with Apple as a scenario, and that scenario will automatically mock the markup and all the API requests needed for that page, both for local dev and for Cypress tests. So you can use the scenario as you're like browsing, as well as like in the Cypress, you can say CUI.scenario user login with Apple, and then all the tests run against that set of mocks just for that one it block. So it's pretty cool. It's like a user flow. Obviously, like, you know, we're running out of time here with like 2 minutes, but the hardest, some of our hardest problems is there's a lot of node modules to install all the time. So it's like, it takes 2.5, sometimes 7 minutes to like install everything. So that kind of sucks. We're still working through ways of breaking that down. And Circle's helping with that some, because what we're going to start doing is generating like maybe do like an NPX for like running just ESLint or something using our configs. But all the tooling is there. So like we can do that and pick out those small things and run them as individual Circle checks. So we may do that soon.
There's also the option of caching your node modules and then having whatever package management tool you're using install, use that restored cache, and then just install the stuff that's changed since you restored that.
And that's actually
your log file.
That's thanks, Scott. That's actually what Alex just said, is something the Circle will do out of the box. That just Jenkins. I tried to do it. I got pretty close to like in Jenkins at the end of the build, like tarring the node modules directory and uploading it to S3, and using like a SHA of the package of the yarn lock to generate the name of the tar file, and then pulling it down at the beginning of the next run. I tried it. I got pretty close, but it was just like, so gnarly. And I think that's how Circle does it in probably their thing. But it's like, now that I have Circle, I don't even have to solve that problem. That's just like a solved problem. So that'll help actually. So that may not even be a con for this setup anymore, because our node modules are going to install really quickly. So that's kind of the 40-ish minutes overview of EBUI in our monorepo. As it sounded like in there, there's probably even more topics that we could talk about from Eventbrite. So maybe we'll do another session on some more stuff at some point.
Does your team still find Yarn a useful thing, or since NPM's caught up to a lot of the feature parity that don't really need Yarn as much?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I
prefer Yarn still.
Yeah, Bolt wraps Yarn, so we don't really have a choice there for that. The Bolt literally just wraps like a lot of Yarn, and it spawns Yarn and does a bunch of things. Me personally, like, I was on that boat as well. Like when Yarn first came out, I was like, God, Facebook, what are you doing, man? Can you just like make NPM better instead of making another thing? I felt like that about a lot of things. After using it for a while, like it's fine. I think it does a really, really good job too. And I've just kind of gotten used to the idea that like it's just about the same. And actually, what we're doing for what is shaking your head?
It's not the same.
Well, it's not the same. It solves a lot of the same problems. and more problems that npm doesn't solve, like workspaces. Workspaces are actually really nice, and Bolt uses them under the covers as well for a few things. So
Yeah, a lot of the symlinking of node dependencies across packages would not be possible without workspaces. npm v7 will have some support for workspaces. We'll have to see what that looks like according to their roadmap. But yeah, just right now Yarn has great support for that already built in.
yeah, and there's a handful of other features that Yarn has still that make it worth using. So I like it. I like it. Long story short, I like it. It's
Cool.
It's good. It does a good job. So thanks for coming. Obviously, feel free to hang if you have any more questions. And yeah, we'll continue to talk in the Slack and tell your other DivOps friends come join us.
Awesome.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
This was recorded. I'll try to get it cleaned up and drop it in there, and maybe even bring this chat over into the agenda. So thanks everyone. Ciao bella. Okay.